This is professional wrestler Chris Rex, and you're listening to the Playmakers Blog Podcast, my only destination for sports talk radio. I am Chris Carpenter, better known as Chris Rex, and for the last 9 years I have been traveling up and down the roads as an independent professional wrestler. I have had the opportunity to train, work with, and share locker rooms with some of the best to ever step foot inside the squared circle. My co-host is Alex Al-Kazzaz, aka the Bear of Texas. A journalist born outside of Lyon, France, he moved to the United States at the age of 4, and his love of sports is what led him to become a sports writer. And with 7 years under his belt already, the sky is the limit for this young Texan. Together, we mix my knowledge and professional experience with his research and sports journalism to bring you a unique view on Vice TV's hit series, Dark Side of the Ring. This is Dark Side of the Podcast.
In 1983, the World Wrestling Federation, now known as World Wrestling Entertainment, was a year from becoming a national promotion thanks to the charisma and in-ring prowess of their larger-than-life characters. None more loved than Jimmy Superfly Snuka, but the life of one of the company's top stars at that time was far from what you would expect. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Alex Al-Kazzaz, a.k.a. the Bear of Texas, and I am here with pro wrestler and current Infinite Pro Wrestling Fury TV champion Chris Rex, and today we discuss Jimmy Snuka and the death of Nancy Argentino. It's an honor to bring back the Dark Side of the Podcast, representing the Playmakers blog. Chris, it's an honor to have you back.
Thank you, and it's an honor to be back on the show with you. Like I said, the last 3 episodes, wow, we've done 3 episodes already. You know, they've been fun. They've been insightful. You know, it's been nice discussing it with you. I've been learning about you as a person as well through discussing these topics with you, and I hope it's the same for you. And yeah, let's keep rocking this podcast, man.
Well, the more you learn about me, the more you're going to see that I'm the kind of sports writer that is nothing more committed than just telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. It's my research. I just do journalism the way it's done. I tell the story. I do my research. I get the facts straight, homie. Those are the words I live by in my sports writing career. And same thing with my podcast. And yes, I will learn more about you. I'm doing my research on you, and I'll continue. As we get to this episode, every episode just blows me out of the water. I mean, you literally go on a journey. I mean, but it gets bumpy and faster. It's like literally, it goes from a kiddie roller coaster to a supernatural, super dangerous. I mean, the bottom line is, you go on a hell of a ride, but that ride gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
It does. It does. As a pro wrestler, I'm seeing these stories from two different. Not that I'm a big time pro wrestler. I'm at the level that a lot of these the people in these stories are about. But as a pro wrestler, I'd see what they've gone through and kind of what's in their head. I try to see it from both sides, and like you said, it is a roller coaster. It's scary so far. So far this season, even last season episodes, there's been some scary episodes, man.
Yes, and speaking of last season, ladies and gentlemen, when this season's over, you can expect some extra feedback. We will go on discussions on the episodes of last season. And honestly, part of the ride is, it's the name of this documentary series, The Dark Side of the Ring. That is very intimidating, and you know, when you watch that, you know you're going to be in for a surprise or two. And to say that you're in for a surprise or two would be nothing but a major understatement, in my opinion.
Oh, you're 100% right, especially with this story with Jimmy Snuka and Nancy Argentino. I mean, I knew a little bit about the story, just a little bit.
And to be honest, in my case, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but in my case, I knew nothing about this until I saw these news reports coming out, I think back in 2015 when he was arrested, I believe. And
that was the first time.
I heard of it.
That was the first time I heard of it as well. So I only knew of what was in those reports, and then he passed away 10 days after. So it was kind of like this was opening up everything to me, and I seen it in a whole different way. Like we discussed before we recorded this, I didn't think I was going to have much to say on it, but this one made me think, man. It really did.
See, another big aspect of this documentary series, you come into an episode thinking you're maybe not going to learn much, but you learn so much, you're blown out of the freaking water, man.
100% right, man. 100% right.
So let's get right to it. Jimmy Snuka, I believe, based on my research, his debut was in 1968 During that time, he was building as a wrestler. He's probably wrestling independently. I know he was in Hawaii, I believe. It wasn't until the 1980s, and he was already in, a long part of his life where he finally arrived to the World Wrestling Federation.
Yeah, and his story, from what Don Morocco said, he grew up with nothing. He really didn't have a home.
Exactly.
So he stuck to wrestling. Wrestling became his life. Wrestling became his family. And, that definitely does happen in the business. I can tell you 100%. There's people that, even if I left the business, we're there for each other. There's a group of people that those are my brothers.
It doesn't surprise me. Because a lot of wrestlers, especially the ones from the heritage of Samoan, Tongan, or Fiji, or Polynesian, a lot of them come from nothing. See, Sam Fatu himself said, he grew up. I think he said he grew up poor. He was always getting in trouble, and then he got I think expelled. He went to juvie because he got into a fight. He beat up a school bus driver, and then he said, his parents sent him to his uncles because his mom's brothers were Alpha and Sika. And they sent their son Sam Fatu to them, and then they told him, all right, well, you're going to be a wrestler because for some of those guys, wrestling, it saves their life because it not only gives them a life, a living, and all these opportunities, but it gives them a reason, to stay out of trouble. It sets them straight. It scares them straight.
I can tell you 100%. It gives you something to live for, man. Me personally, being able to do pro wrestling and following my dream, it kind of saved me.
See, and that's in Jimmy Snuka's case. That's exactly what happened. Wrestling finally gave him something to be proud of, something to be part of. It gave him all the opportunities that he spent his entire life looking for. So to say that he was happy being in professional wrestling, that too would be a major understatement. However, as we know, the world of professional wrestling, it's not what it looks like. It's not a simple task. Being on the road all the time, wrestling, putting your body through hell, it affects you mentally, physically, emotionally. You're a professional wrestler. You could basically relate to what I'm saying right now.
I wrestle nowhere near the amount that Jimmy Snuka did, that most top indie guys do. But still, you come home sore, you come home beat up, especially if you should be giving your all out there. And yes, we try to protect ourselves, but sometimes things happen. You get a shiner or two, you get a bruise or two, you get chops in the chest. Those are real, man, and you feel them. And sometimes, you get injured, and we take that risk going in there.
Exactly. Now, Jimmy Snuka arrived in the World Wrestling Federation. I believe it was in 1982. He was originally a heel, and I believe he was paired up with longtime villainous manager Captain Lou Albano. Until they decided, because since he was so popular with the fans, his acrobatics, his high-flying style, his wrestling style, his popularity, Vince McMahon said, you know what, if he's over like that with the fans, he needs to become a babyface. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term babyface means good guy wrestler. They decided, since he was portrayed as a real-life Tarzan, so they decided, you know what, if he's Tarzan, he has to be a good guy. So they made him to a good guy, and then they paired him up with Buddy Rogers. But not only was Buddy Rogers his manager on screen, but it's the off-screen part that's also interesting because Buddy Rogers was basically his chaperone. Buddy Rogers took him everywhere, kept an eye on him.
Buddy Rogers was his life manager, man. He drove Snuka everywhere. He handled all his bookings. He handled his money. He handled, I'm sure, the contracts. I'm sure he made sure he was in the hotels. But at that time, Jimmy Snuka, like most wrestlers during that time, they liked to party. You did drugs. A lot of guys did drugs. And that's what he chose to do. And it got to the point where Buddy Rogers couldn't take it anymore. And he didn't want to manage Snuka anymore. He's this top babyface. So that intro that you gave, little do people know, the life that he lived when those cameras were off.
You see, that's a big part of wrestling, folks. The guy you see on TV, off camera, they're not the same person you see because you just don't know what they're going through in their life. And yes, Buddy Rogers did not want to manage him. He didn't want to put up with him whatsoever because, according to Rogers, now while Snuka was a sweet guy, he was nice and all, Snuka had a serious cocaine addiction.
When this guy's revved up on cocaine and you don't know what he's going to do next. You're trying to drive him and he's just sitting there freely on the highway sniffing coke. it gets to a point where, all right, I'm worried for my safety and my mental state. I can't take this anymore. I can't do this job for him anymore.
So in other words, it seems like Buddy Rogers just didn't want to babysit him anymore.
You also have to understand that he also, from what his wife had said, that he didn't know how to read or write. Who knows if people took advantage of him, if that's true, if he didn't know how to read or write.
And in that case, I mean, his life was even more brutal. So Buddy Rogers goes to Vince and says, I don't want to be with Snuka anymore. So I guess they decided, because I believe Jimmy was already in love with a girl named Nancy Argentino.
What happened is they had met and they fell in love with each other. Snuka did have a wife previously that she did not know about. She pretty much fell in love, and if you took your girl on the road, she helped you out. And it was just natural like that. A lot of wrestlers had their wives on the road or their girlfriends on the road. Sam
Fatu, a.k.a. the Tonga Kid, said, when you're on the road by yourself, it gets very, very boring. I mean, it hurts you, honestly, and I can imagine so, because, you know, a lot of wrestlers, I mean, they always, a lot of them will travel together. So he's with Nancy Argentino. I mean, they're in love. I mean, she doesn't know that he's married. I believe he was married, but he was like, I guess he was separated.
The way the episode showed it is he kept it hidden from her and her family.
And then it comes to the part where Snuka was at Nancy's house. They're having dinner, and then one of the sisters comes in, and apparently she behaved in a way that Snuka did not really appreciate.
This kind of threw me off, because she said she came in jolly. The way Snuka reacted, who does that? She's in the middle of a conversation all happy, and he just looks at her and puts his hand, like, pretty much telling her he could choke her. What set him off?
Like, what's his problem?
And it could be the drugs. It could be anything. I mean, you look back at the episode we did with Chris Van Ron, we talked about CTE. Who knows, at this time, CTE wasn't even a thing. Who knows if he was already losing it.
Nancy's sister says, you know, she got up, walked away, and then Nancy followed her and said, you know, it's okay. I mean, he's tired. He wrestled. He just got done wrestling. He's not like that. And then a little bit later, it says that he felt bad, and he says he wants to give her something, and then apparently he gave her cocaine.
Yeah, this one kind of made me laugh, because the way she said it, he goes, he wanted to give me something, and he put cocaine in my hand, and I think I gave it back. I'm not trying to make light of this situation. Who says I think I gave it back? So you don't know if you gave it back or you took the cocaine. That's something you would know. If you didn't do drugs, you would know that you gave it back to him. You wouldn't say, I think I gave it back to him.
I understand where you're coming from. But anyway, she tells Nancy, you need to get rid of him, and she says, no, he's alright. But that's just the beginning. And then it fast forwards to, they're in a hotel, and then one of the sisters, I think it was the same one, she says she gets a call at about 2 in the morning, and it's Nancy on the phone, and she's like screaming and saying that, Jimmy's mad, he's chasing her. And even people in the hotel were saying, it sounds like a woman's being beaten. I think that's when the dirty little secrets about the relationship started appearing to be a lie. Like Jimmy Snuka was mistreating her.
It started getting worse. It was a relationship apparently full of drug abuse on Jimmy Snuka's side, domestic abuse. It was an abusive relationship for Nancy. And who knows what was going through his mind or what triggered him. That's things we'll never know, because unfortunately both people are deceased now.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? It's a long process. It's a hard, thought out process. Yeah, I know. I was there. From March of this year, thinking about how I'm going to do this, doing all my research, trying to get everything right. What platforms can we use and how we going to record it and how we going to make it sound good and make it all this happen. And then I came upon Anchor. The Anchor app on my phone, the easiest choice I could ever make to do a podcast. It's free to use. You don't got to pay for nothing. You can record episodes whenever you're ready. You can edit it and then you can release them when you want to. And you don't have to worry about trying to figure out how you're going to distribute it on other platforms, because Anchor has partnerships with Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Pocket Cast, whatever you name it. Because the Playmakers Wild Podcast is the podcast that I use. We're on all them platforms. We're on 9 platforms just by using the Anchor app. So pretty much all the questions that you have questions about doing a podcast, go to the Anchor app or go to the Anchor website, anchor.fm.com, and just search through it, ask questions. Because I tell you, a free app that does all this, there's nothing more you can ask for. I even got friends, they doing their podcast on the Anchor app. Faith Talk, you might have heard of it because it's very good. And it's great that it's an app like this, it's a website like this that makes it easier for people to do podcasts and do what they love best, talking about the things that they love to talk about. So give Anchor a try, see how much you like it. We'll love to hear your podcast.
So now we get to the big date. We get a little bit of a story about them doing house shows in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They mentioned about a hotel that was apparently popular. A journalist says people would see Andre hang out in a bar. So now it's the day is May 10th, 1983. They're having a WWF taping, so they're at their hotel, and apparently we're already getting word that Nancy's not feeling well. And then, according to Snuka, while they were driving, they were at a truck stop. Nancy had to go use the restrooms, and apparently there's a claim that she fell and hit her head.
It's just crazy because his story changed a couple times. First, he claimed that he pushed her down and that could have caused it, but he went out to go do the show and came back, then left again, and then came back and called the ambulance. So that was the first story he told. Mm-hmm. And then he said that it happened while they were on the road. They stopped. She fell and hit her head when he was calling her over to the car. There was two different stories there. Again, I can't say who's guilty or not, but I would say right there that would cause science to investigate. And I think that's the big thing about this case is I don't believe it was investigated properly.
I don't think so, too, because just like you mentioned, there were two stories. Isn't that a little bit suspicious or shady that he's changing his story? If his second story is true, if she hit her head while they're on the road, why didn't they seek medical attention immediately? Could it be maybe because, he had to go to the taping, he couldn't miss it? So some people say it's a bit shady that, she was already hurting and he left her at the hotel. Like, he puts her there in the morning, he goes to the arena, does some pre-taping, whatnot, he comes back and checks on her, and then leaves again, and it's gone for 8 hours. I'm not saying anything that Snuka had anything to do with that. I'm just kind of pointing out based on what I've seen. And then obviously he comes back, and then he realizes that something's not right. But yeah, I think the investigation did not go the right way.
We as you know, this point of the episode, okay, when we get to this point, this is where kind of the roller coaster starts getting loopy. Mm-hmm. This is he wasn't ever detained or arrested, charges filed against him or anything. And that's just crazy because you think the way the justice system works now, that's impossible. That's the first person you check out and you thoroughly investigate that person, the last person that was with them.
Exactly. I mean, he was interrogated, I believe, but nothing came out of it. I mean, he was just released, like I said, not detained. He was just released. Like, he answered their questions, he cooperated, and they said, okay, you can go. If we need you again, we'll call you.
Now, this is what really blew my mind. The meeting with Vince McMahon. That's what blew my mind. Snuka, I believe the lawyers and the law enforcement, and Snuka signed something. And this is why I brought up earlier that he didn't know how to read or write. So who knows what was signed? From a business standpoint, Vince had to try to protect his company.
Exactly.
Snuka was a top star in his company, so he had to look out for the public interest of his company. So I understand having a meeting, but it's just how everything went down after. When they interviewed the detective that was on the case, he was looking up at the ceiling. He was thinking of answers, and it was like you could clearly tell he did not do his job, whether he didn't care or he was trying to protect the city because they needed WWF. I think, when I put all those pieces together, that's kind of what it comes out to be.
I like what you're doing. I'm sorry, by the way, I cut you off, but I like how you're doing this, Chris. Like, you're basically you're your own detective. You're basically solving the case in your own way. But yeah, you're right. I did notice that the detective.
Me and my partner watched a lot of those murder mystery stories and all that. We watched almost every one of them. So Like you start to learn things, and you start to pick up on people's gestures and what they do with their eyes and the way their head turns when you ask them a question. Just looking at him, it was kind of like he definitely didn't do his job. And screw that, this guy was a professional wrestler. Like at this point, it's a human being was murdered by another human being. That's how you have to look at this. You have to put his accolades aside. You have to put his popularity aside and judge the man for what the man did to this woman. They had this meeting. Who knows what went on? And then Vince McMahon calls the mother and asks if $25,000 would help them.
See, another big shady part right there. But as you mentioned, Vince had to do what was right for his business because Jimmy supervised Snuka was their top guy.
But this man didn't get a speeding ticket. Not a minor offense. He's under investigation for killing somebody. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and you're totally right. Yes, and honestly, what's amazing, his career. I mean, after the whole thing, the whole case went cold. That's when Snuka's career in the WWF just skyrocketed because this was before he had the famous cage match with Don Morocco, where he climbed up to the cage and then did the superfly, did the splash, but. And also, and we get to the and when we go back to the $25,000, I mean that is absolutely shady as fuck. Honestly, did Vince really think that a bribing attempt of $25,000? I mean, I don't know how much $25,000 was back in the early '80s, but it doesn't matter. Did you really think that a bribe, like that you could bribe somebody to forget the death of of their young daughter after she was allegedly murdered?
She was in her early 20s.
Yeah.
She was a young woman. She was from out here in Brooklyn, New York. That's another thing. I was like, whoa, she was from Brooklyn.
Exactly.
Like when they said Flatbush Chevy, I said, oh, so that's like right around home.
The mom, she didn't say anything. She slammed the phone. Because Superfly was, not charged with anything, he was basically, let go. And he was the only suspect involved in the investigation. Charges were not pressed, although the case,
it went cold.
We're not getting anywhere. We're just going to close it. Argentino's parents, they ended up suing in the U.S. District Court in Philadelphia, and they ended up winning a $500,000 default judgment against Snuka. They never got a dime out of it, though, because Snuka claimed, he couldn't afford it because of financial inability, although people will say, how could he not afford it if he was the top star?
I mean, who knows if or what he was getting paid?
I mean, we don't know.
Again, they say his wife said he couldn't write or read English. Who knows if he was being taken advantage of? Like, he didn't even show sympathy at the funeral.
That's what we get to next. He arrives at the funeral. They said he was dressed in flip flops, shorts, like he was like and wearing a tank top. And then he goes to to the corpse, and then the Undertaker comes up to the father and says, it was very difficult for them to prepare the body for burial, and he mentions that her neck had visible marks on her. And you know what that indicates, Chris? It indicates that maybe he might have choked her, or maybe he grabbed her by the throat and threw her down, but the Undertaker mentions that they found hand marks or something.
That's a fact. Unfortunately, the autopsy was not publicly available at this time.
They mentioned the autopsy was not to be released. And I don't know who's responsible for that. Maybe it was the police or whatever. But that's another thing right there.
I'm not a judge. I don't have any degree in law. I can just put pieces together. I would like to think I'm a somewhat smart individual that can, see things and put things together, but 1 + 1 = 2. In 1984, WWF went national.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that Vince might have paid off some people to cover up the whole case, to make the case go cold, that's where it goes nowhere, and it goes to the point where they have no choice but to close it? I mean, I'm not saying Vince did or didn't. It's just this whole case is shady.
Something definitely went on, and I don't know whose part it went on.
And I think this episode is the biggest what-if of them all so far. This is probably the biggest what-if in the history of controversial incidents in the world of professional wrestling. Like, for example, what if the investigation had been investigated a different way and different things were found? What if he was actually, brought up on charges? What if Vince actually did the right thing? And you see, folks, we will never know. This is one of the biggest mysteries of life, and honestly, we'll never know because even if Jimmy was still alive, I mean, he'd have no recollection of what happened.
Yeah, and then the case gets reopened 30 years later. due to a journalist, wink, wink, writing a story about this case, the 30-year anniversary of this case, and the case gets reopened, and the autopsy gets revealed. Why don't you tell everybody what that autopsy said?
The coroner said that there was a possible sign of serious domestic abuse. This is not only from what I remember in the episode, but I also did my research. The autopsy findings show that Argentino suffered more than 24 cuts and bruises, which, according to the report, it's a possible sign of not only a simple domestic abuse, but a very serious domestic abuse. That's one thing. But here's something else. It said the coroner report stated that she died of traumatic brain injuries consistent with a moving head striking a stationary object. And furthermore, these dozens of cuts and bruises appeared to appear on her head, her ear, her chin, arms, back, legs, feet. This report finally is released.
And the one major point that really struck to me is the coroner himself said that this homicide should be further investigated. That's the big point of this episode that really got me, is that ending.
If I were to ask him why were you not allowed to state the report, even today you probably can't reveal why. Do you think maybe the coroner was told if somebody asks you, you don't say a word? Do you think that maybe they ordered him to be silenced?
I don't know. I mean, who knows?
Exactly. Another what if. Another what if. What if he was purposely silenced or whatnot? See,
if he's told by superiors not to release any information, he has to do his job.
Exactly.
So you really can't blame him for doing his job.
I mean, I'm sure he had a family, kids and a wife to take care of. So yeah, see, another what if. I mean, that's why, folks, this episode is a huge list of what ifs. This is the mystery of wrestling. I mean, I've already explained. I mean, this whole thing is a mystery that will never, ever be solved. Now, we got through the whole autopsy report, and I hope I report everything correctly. The coroner stated, and I quote, "Upon viewing the body and speaking to the pathologist, I immediately suspected foul play, and I notified the district attorney." So, on September 1st, 2015, which is 32 years after the incident, Snuka is arrested and charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. And that was actually the oldest case to result in charges in the Lehigh County's history. And the biggest question on everybody's mind is, what took them so long? And it's just so mysterious how a journalist wants to do a story on the 30-year anniversary, then all of a sudden, these pieces come together, Chris. I am absolutely blown away. So, Chris, I want to ask you, when you learned that he was arrested, what was going through your mind?
I mean, yeah, the case was opened up, but he had already been diagnosed with cancer in his stomach. He was suffering from dementia. Who knows what else was wrong with him? They brought him up on the charges, and the judge deemed him mentally unfit to stand trial.
He's arrested September 1st, 2015, which is 32 years after the incident. October 7th, 2015, his lawyers agreed to forego a preliminary hearing, but then they received transcripts and other evidence from the investigation. But on November 2nd, he pleaded not guilty, and then they had a hearing to determine whether he was competent to stand trial, and that was to start in May 2016. His attorneys argued that Snuka's mental and physical health be so badly deteriorated that makes him mentally incompetent to stand trial because, as you mentioned, he had dementia. That's damage to the brain. I mean, he probably has no idea what happened. Maybe he had no idea that he was even a famous wrestler. I mean, I don't know much about dementia, but your brain is badly damaged. You don't remember most of your life. So that's why on June 1st, 2016, it was ruled that he was not mentally competent to stand trial. And then officially on January 3rd, 2017, the charge ended up being dismissed.
Putting him in jail, what would it have done? Because he died 10 days later. Even if he would have been charged, he would have either A, died during trial or died in jail. I can't say he did it. Can't say he didn't do it. But at that point, he doesn't even know who he is, probably. You got to feel bad for Nancy Argentino. At the end of it, you got to feel bad for Jimmy Snuka because at that point, if you put him on the stand, he wouldn't have been able to tell you who she was, probably, or who he was. Or who anybody in that courtroom was.
Just like I mentioned, he probably had no idea that he was a former wrestler, that he was really famous. It's just amazing. 32 years later, Snuka's an old dude. His health is badly deteriorated, both physically and mentally. The whole thing might have just simply been a waste of time. I mean, that's just the way I feel about it.
I hate to say it, it was pointless.
So, Chris, I'd like you to explain the similarities, from all the episodes as we wrap this episode up.
the mental strain that professional wrestling takes on us is greater than the physical pain, you know? Mentally, once you're gone, you're gone. And I noticed that everybody in these episodes, it's like, once you get ticked off, that's it. It's like you're a ticking time bomb. It's a perfect title for the series, Dark Side of the Ring.
Exactly, because it takes you to the dark side of the world of professional wrestling. You go on a ride, you go on a journey, you come back changed because you've learned so many things. You're just like, wow. Because that's how I feel. I didn't expect this. My hats off to the producers and the creators of this series. I mean, well-researched. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, without them, we wouldn't be able to do this show, right?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
As a professional wrestler, watching this and seeing it from different sides, it makes you think about what you do and the people you're around, and honestly, mental health, the stress of being on the road, the pressure of being a star, the money, all of that, the drugs.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and it overwhelms the brain. It overwhelms the mind, and you either hold it in and break out, or you have to have somebody there. And unfortunately, in some of these circumstances, the people that were there were the ones that got hurt the most.
Well, folks, we're done for tonight. Tune in next week. Chris and we will discuss the newest episode, and the episode will be about the assassination of Dino Bravo. I will be ready to be blown away once again. And folks, get ready, because on next week's episode, I'll do what I do best. I'm going to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Chris, thank you for joining me. Y'all have a good night.